Good morning, everybody. Happy last day of COP. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We're thrilled to have you. Our next session will be Climate Positive Growth, Feasible or Wishful Thinking with Oxford SM. So please help me in welcoming your panelists today. Thank you.
So this session focuses on whether or not you can achieve climate positive growth, and whether it's wishful thinking or whether it's feasible. And we're going to share some of our experiences and perspectives on whether we believe that is possible. My name is Andrew, and I'm joined by my colleagues Adam and Carol, and we'll take this through for the next hour and have some discussion with you as we go through.
Hello, everybody. So let's start with a statement of the obvious. Big business is a big part of the problem. I guess after last year's COP26, the scale of that problem became more evident for many. So a group called Purpose Disruptors published a report in the UK which talked about the fact that advertised emissions added an extra 32% to each person in the UK's carbon footprint. That was pretty shocking to many people. What's even more shocking is since COP26, that number has actually gone up to 32%. So it's clearly a big problem and it's getting worse. I guess there's some hope in the sense that these big businesses are starting to realize that problem. They're starting to commit to measurable targets, which is a good thing, right? So we've got an increasing number of companies committing to net zero, and some of those committing to science-based targets. But you may say, but there's not a clear plan. You may say they're not transparent in measuring that and publicizing their progress on that plan. And you may say that's not happening fast enough. They're not making enough progress quickly enough.
So who on earth are we? So we're a company called Oxford SM, and we actually have a lot of these big companies as our clients. And that led us to start thinking about what our mission was. So what could we do to try and make a difference? We do sales and marketing consultancy, so we're part of the problem, yeah? So what could we do? So our mission is to work out how can we influence and create change amongst our clients, yeah? Without obviously going out of business in the process, because that would be slightly self-defeating. So the first thing you have to do, don't you, is get your own house in order. So this is what we've done. So first of all, we certified as a B Corp, which was a really interesting process, and it was wonderful to hear yesterday from the Sustainable founder. It was really powerful. We're also part of a campaigning organisation in the UK called the Better Business Act, which is about trying to change the legal framework of what it means to be a business and to satisfy more than just shareholders, yeah, but to think broader about your stakeholders. So certified as a B Corp, we're part of a campaign group in the UK to change the framework for business called the Better Business Act. And we also started our journey to realise just how much carbon we were emitting and what we could do about that over time. And we've just committed through a programme of both reducing our carbon, but also of capturing our carbon that by next year will be net zero. That's all really lovely, by the way, but the problem is this. We're quite a small organisation versus these massive clients we have. So actually our real opportunity, this is just getting our own house in order. Our real opportunity is this one, which is how can we, a group of about 130 people, impact those really big clients we have? So how could we use our influence for good? Now we've got our own house in order. But here's the problem. We're not climate change experts. In fact, I'm really not a climate change expert. I've read a lot of books now and listened to a lot of podcasts, like I guess quite a few of you. But I'm definitely not an expert. But here's the thing I am an expert in. I'm a behaviour change expert. And the reason I know that is because for 30 years of my career, I have been doing behaviour change. So, you know, maybe not very glamorous behaviour change, but quite powerful behaviour change, because I worry about things like people needing to clean their teeth and why will they choose Sensodyne over another brand of toothpaste. We have done more complicated behaviour change as well, so not just the more simple behaviour change. We have a section of our business that's done a lot of work on things like how could we tackle obesity in the UK, so that was a big programme called Change for Life. We've also worked with things like Macmillan Cancer Support on what a good death looks like, which is quite a grim topic for this early in the morning, I'm sorry, but a powerful and important one. So we've done other work that's good, but that's always been quite a small bit of our business, if I'm honest. So the challenge, once again, is not those, but these people. How can we change or help these people change? And help people in those organisations who really want to change. So that's the challenge that we've set ourselves. So we definitely don't have all the answers. So if you've come expecting the answers, you're definitely in the wrong session. But what we'd love to share with you are 3 barriers. So 3 barriers that we keep coming across as we work with these big organisations, and why we've got some hope despite those 3 barriers. So we're going to try and stick with the hope. That's my marketing background. Yeah, I always have to be optimistic. But also 7 lessons. So 7 things we've learned that hopefully might be useful to some of you and you might be able to use with others. So that's what we're going to go through. And as we're doing that, we're going to keep thinking about this. So the climate is changing. Why aren't we? And I don't mean we as in we, Oxford, me and my colleagues. I don't even mean we as is all people we work with in big business. I mean, we just totally, like, we're facing an existential threat to our future. Why on earth aren't people changing? And that's what we want to think about.
Okay, so a fundamental challenge, a scary potential outcome, these barriers better be pretty big. Yes and no. So let's share the 3 barriers and the hope we're seeing around them. So the first of the barriers, no surprise. The current version of capitalism that we employ as our economic system means this is pretty substantial. The primacy of short-term profit growth. Why is it substantial? You may say, it's greed. Stop it, do the right thing, commit to the change, make what's right, and suffer some of those consequences. But for the CEOs, I guess, that we're trying to talk to, we're asking them to jump first. Jump first and potentially take the impacts of that to your business and potentially lose your business. Jobs of hundreds of thousands of people, the responsibilities you believe you hold as a representative of shareholders, for example. Be that right or be that wrong, it's true. But we are seeing some hope here. There are examples where no longer are we expecting these people to jump first, put that business at significant risk. What we're starting to see are collaborations and coalitions forming. So this is one example. This is an example of 7 pharma CEOs bringing their businesses together or their themselves together to work out how they accelerate the path to net zero. And that's quite a big thing because, of course, pharma has been notoriously competitive. Huge investments in drug research and drug design, need to restore the returns on that with profits rapidly over a few years. So jumping first in this kind of sector is a really big deal. This feels possible. Yesterday we heard from the legal frameworks discussion that what's been put in the way of this in the past are antitrust laws. You can't collaborate. This starts looking like a cartel. And they said, no, that's not true. That's not in the way because it's not designed to drive profit. So there's nothing in the way of this. So we've realized there's an implied action for us as an organization, which is now to help fan the flames of this. What more can we do to bring groups together to make these commitments and these transitions happen faster? And secondly, how can we take this now as a thing that's happening and translate it through their organizations? Your CEOs are collaborating. Right, we need to now do something in the middle layers of the business. So that barrier, we think, can be reduced significantly, which feels really positive.
So we've always believed working in healthcare was important because you're actually having an impact on people in the planet. But to start seeing this, and this was only last week that they committed to this, makes us quite proud because we work for some of those companies. We haven't seen that kind of collective commitment in the past. So that was quite a big step. And the fact that it was just last week is amazing. It's taken a while, but still amazing. So the second barrier we've termed small cog, big machine. And I think that came out quite a lot yesterday at least, and has been something that we've picked up repeatedly in companies. Individually, whether it's individuals in a company, whether it's departments in a company, whether it's individual companies, this feeling that actually you can't make much of a difference. This feeling that unless you're part of something bigger, you're not going to be able to have a positive impact. So there is a feeling of helplessness if you feel like a really small cog. But what gives us hope? A couple of things. And the first one is an example with Seventh Generation, who we've worked with. Now, Seventh Generation, if you don't know them, is a North American detergents and household cleaning company. And they were formed many years ago on the basis of being ecologically friendly. And the name has a very interesting story. And I think, Carol, do you want to just share the name story?
So it's a really simple thought, which that you don't do something just for this generation, you do it thinking about the impact for 7 generations to come, which is a really interesting way of thinking about decisions that you make, and I personally think a really powerful one.
So Unilever bought them a couple of years ago. Unilever was on an acquisition spree, as you know, and they bought Seventh Generation, and you can understand why they would have done that. So we were working with the CEO, or the former CEO of Seventh Generation, and we said to him, Joey Bergstein, we said, what are you most proud of? And he said, well, naturally, I'm proud of working for a company like this that is designed and focused on trying to continually improve our environmentally friendly credentials while still helping people to clean their surfaces and clean their clothes. He said, but the thing I'm most proud of, is the impact that a small little company like Seventh Generation is having on Unilever's thinking about its supply chain, how it sources ingredients they use, and how they manage their cycle. Now, has that changed completely? No. But that probably wouldn't have happened as fast if Seventh Generation hadn't been in the mix. And Joey said, the thing I'm proudest of is the impact that we're having on this big, giant company. So that was interesting because you don't often see that. What we see is what Seventh Generation is doing with their marketing, but the impact within the organization, the small cog driving the bigger machinery, is a big deal. The second one is when you feel you have collective voice. Now, we're a B Corp, and we heard yesterday from a few B Corps. When you join together, the impact of those voices has the ability to have real change. And we're seeing how quickly that B Corp movement is growing, but also how quickly that B Corp movement now needs to change. I think they're going to be changing their standards in the next year. But the important thing is it feels like you have a much bigger voice when you're part of that B Corp movement rather than being an individual company. And that was one of the reasons, or one of the things we've learned from joining the B Corp group, that we can have more impact together than alone.
Okay, the third one, again, pretty familiar to you, I guess, and will resonate. We've called this one, look at our green creds, or alternatively, look at our greenwashing creds. So this is the inaction caused by sound bites. This idea that sitting in a company, you can say, but hey, look at our beautiful brochure. Look at what our CEO said, or look at this target that's 30 years hence. We're okay. We're doing all the good stuff, aren't we? I don't need to take any action myself, or we don't need to take any action as a group. And this is really insidious, this one, isn't it? Because these people feel they're doing the right thing, actually, as a result. But we are seeing some hope again. And the hope comes in 3 forms. The hope, firstly, is regulators are starting to have some teeth, some real teeth. So there's a great example from HSBC, the world's global bank. After last year's COP26, they came out with a whole series of advertising that basically talked about all the good green investments they were doing and how wonderful they were, effectively. The Advertising Standards Authority in the UK have banned their adverts because they're misleading. Why? Because they said HSBC had not made clear and transparent the climate harm they had caused previously. So talking about themselves as being a green investment sort of, bank, no, you're not. You've caused significant climate harm, and you need to be clear and transparent about that. So regulators with teeth, that's really, really enthusing to see. You cannot get away with saying stuff and not being held to account. The second one comes from within companies themselves. So we've seen quite a lot of this recently. So procurement in organizations now looking to source services from third parties in a slightly different way, but an importantly different way. So I sat on the supplier conference for one of the big pharmaceuticals companies, Sanofi. And their board was on the conference committing to a new approach for buying services. And they talked about 2 things. One, they're going to audit all of their suppliers for Scope 1 and 2 emissions. So their current supplier base needs to stand up and be counted in terms of their own emissions. Secondly, they're going to buy future services on the basis of 2 obvious things, cost and competence. But a slightly surprising third thing, which is their ability to impact Sanofi's Scope 3 emissions. And they actually said on the conference they're going to weight that last one more heavily than the first 2. So again, it's all incremental moves, changes that are going to all add up to hopefully mean something different. And the third thing, I particularly like this one, which is groups appearing that are starting to take commitments and promises and analyze them with forensic detail to work out if they're true or not, whether progress has been made or not, or whether there is an ability to actually deliver what's been said. So this is the New Climate Institute, and they took 25 companies, I think, and examined their net zero and carbon neutrality targets, and have literally done it to the nth degree of detail, and have brutally sort of exposed, if you like, the integrity of those commitments. There's no hiding here now. There are plenty of groups like this that are holding governments and organisations to account. So I think the places to hide and to distract with glossy brochures is disappearing. And that feels good. So there are big three barriers, and they're fairly obvious ones, I guess, but I'm interested to know what you guys think. But maybe have a quick conversation with the person next to you or behind you, see how you're feeling about these, and I'd be interested to hear any responses, anything you're seeing that's positive, any disagreements you have with what we've put up here. So take a couple of minutes, have a conversation, and then we've got some microphones roaming, I think, and then let's hear from you.
So it would be good to hear from a couple of people, just your reactions and observations to the barriers that we're seeing, whether you're seeing the same or whether you have any commentary on them. And I think there are one or two microphones. Yes.
Hello. Thank you very much for this. Number 2 was very, very relevant to me. I run an NGO that repurposes clothes donation to provide them to underprivileged students and families. So we are a small cog, but we deal with thousands and thousands of donors and thousands of beneficiaries. So a simple maybe brochure of awareness would be amazing, and thank you for highlighting that out. We are very focused in our provisions, but I think we can do a lot of good if we add awareness to our operation. So yes, we thought we couldn't do anything, but I think we should, give it a little bit of a thought. Thank you.
That's very nice, because actually adding awareness is one thing, but people also being aware of you and being able to support you and maximize it is another thing. So that's great. Thank you.
Is it okay? Yeah. So thank you so much for the presentation. In our little conversation, we decided that we're not pretty surprised. I mean, I'm from academia, he's just close to you. But the point is that maybe we need number 4. Because even if we are talking about good, any good project about green initiatives or innovations, and we communicate in the wrong way with the target audience, so it could be expected and could be, it could make an image of greenwashing, even if it's not. So maybe there should be number 4 about information gap and communication gap in the way we produce and promote that. Thank you.
Well at it. Excellent, thank you.
And to be honest, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, there's a couple, right?
In fact, we had a bit of an argument about which ones to choose, and we thought 3 was probably enough. Otherwise, it would get a little bit depressing, but we totally agree.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I just got here a little late. I just want to comment on number 3. So I'm a supplier of carbon credits, doing biochar for smallholder farmers in Kenya and in Ghana. And from the other side, I'm seeing that for sure we are competing with a lot of greenwashing credits. Now the problem is, in terms of verification, what is needed? To verify, you need to send samples to Ohio or Germany from Kenya, because those are the only accredited labs, so there's a little bit of a mafia. And then that's not only a lot of CO2, but it's also not financially viable. Then number 2 is the smartphones access from the smallholder farmers to actually track the coordinates. So I think we're still a long way to get to climate justice to make these credits accessible for smallholder farmers. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I'm also looking forward to a mid-spot solution.
Yeah, that's a really good challenge. I mean, it's interesting because, of course, people buying biochar, tick, we can now move on, can't we? But then understanding the complexities, as you say, the climate justice implications within that, again, there's not an awareness, I think, necessarily back in businesses that are buying these things. They're remote from the realities. So again, information is really important. But I'm not sure how we change that in the near future. How do you, because it's important we audit this and ensure that it's real.
I'm a strong believer on probability theory, so we rather get 90% accuracy and get the testing in Kenya and produce 100,000 tons
Yes.
than 1,000 tons with 97% accuracy. So I think we can do it all together, but we should just go for the probability and game.
It's net more.
Exactly.
Yeah, agreed.
Exactly.
Love that.
Cool. So 3 barriers. We also promised 7 lessons, which we hope might be helpful. And these are things we found are pretty important for us being successful in helping our big clients make changes. And the first one is brave public leadership. I don't know if that sounds surprising or not, but actually, when you run a big corporation, brave public leadership can be quite a hard thing to do because you are judged on whether you deliver against the things you state in public. So what you find is big corporations don't make public commitments very often that they don't know how they're going to achieve. In fact, a lot of people will have been working a long time to work out how you achieve the commitment before it's made public. Brave public leadership doesn't look like that, though. So our best example of brave public leadership is this, and I know it's a little old now, but I still think it's an amazing example, which is we started working with Unilever shortly after they published their first sustainable living plan. And what really shocked me when I went in to try and help them and work with them on this was they had no idea how they were going to deliver it. And that, in a corporate world, is incredibly brave. And I still think the quote from Paul Polman, if a goal's not making you uncomfortable, it's not aggressive enough, is a really powerful one. So we need to see more of this stuff because this stuff is really magic in a corporate environment.
And I'm always a bit of a cynic on these things, and but how stretching and how brave this was actually became evident a couple of years after these were set, when Unilever was, where a competitor tried to aggressively acquire Unilever. So it was real. I mean, he took genuine kind of action and genuine kind of risk alongside this.
And the great news is that nasty, aggressive takeover bid was not successful. And I personally believe one of the reasons it wasn't successful was because everybody in the corporate world was desperate for Unilever to be successful in what it was doing. So this stuff is scary, but it really does matter. The second lesson we've learned is we all start in different places. And I'm going to use a really old-fashioned marketing tool that some of you will know called the adoption curve here. So this adoption curve, it's not, by the way, it's not earth-shattering this, but everybody is in a different place when it comes to different issues. So in some places, you will be an innovator. You will be leading a change. In some places, you'll be an early adopter. Maybe you're the early majority. That's where most people sit. And then a few of us are laggards. So I know definitely I'm a laggard when it comes to adopting some new forms of IT, right? I definitely am the very last person to do it. But in some stuff, I'm an innovator where I really care passionately about things. Accepting that everybody is in a different place is really powerful when you're trying to bring about change. Because if you're trying as an innovator to get all of your energy to get the laggards to change their mind, it is exhausting. Much, much better is to spend your time and energy with a group of like-minded people who want to change, and then something magic happens. So if you create a coalition of the willing in those early adopters and innovators, because we're a social species, guess what? It looks successful and exciting, and then people start joining you, and then you don't have to spend all that energy trying to convince the laggards to change their mind. And that's really, really apparent in some of the big organizations we've worked with. We heard it a little bit yesterday, but we came up with this term called the stuck middle. So what you find in big corporate organizations is there'll be somebody at the top who said, we want to do this. There'll be a bunch of people who learnt about climate change in school who go, of course, I mean, it's just obvious, we must do it. And then you have a bunch of people, usually about my age, I hate to say it, who have been really successful in big corporations doing things in a very specific way that had nothing to do with climate change or social justice. And those are the people that it's really hard to change because they don't know any other way of doing it, and they've been very successful doing it the way they're doing it. So that stuck middle and working out where you spend your energy when you're trying to make change is a really powerful thought.
So one of the things that it's very easy to do if you take any of these different audiences in an organization or even outside of an organization is it's very easy to judge them. And it's very easy to label them quite negatively and to say those people, right? To say those people, what they're doing or what they're not doing. And one of the things we've learned, you have to move from judgment to understanding. So it's easier said than done. And I'm going to ask you for a reaction to a photograph in a moment. I'm going to put a photograph up and I want you to react immediately and just call out your reactions. So when I show you this image, what does it make you think immediately? Just call out what it makes you think immediately. Hunger. Yep. Bad nutrition. Malnutrition. Okay. Empathy. Lonely. Day off. So that's really interesting. So that actually elicited a couple of really positive responses or empathetic responses. Now at the time, and I'll tell you a UK story, at the time, and this goes back about 10 years, there was a major crisis in the UK and in many other countries, which was the rise of childhood obesity. Obesity was and is one of the biggest issues, but childhood obesity was continually increasing. So the UK is an example, but it's across many other countries. But what was happening is the media and many big influencers were judging, and they were saying, it's bad. As parents, you should not feed your kids bad snacks and sugary drinks, right? And the UK government had spent a lot of money and a lot of time advertising to stop giving your kids sugary drinks, stop giving them salty snacks. But nothing was changing. Because what they were doing is they were saying, you're bad parents. Now, how many parents do you know who are bad, inherently bad? Most parents are trying to do a good job, right? So what we did is we were brought in by the Department of Health to help them make sense of why behavior wasn't changing. And we got hold of all the data, existing data, and the UK government and the Department of Health had a lot of data. And we spoke to a lot of healthcare professionals and people who were experts. And we spoke to UK people, citizens, and we said, what's going on? And here were some observations. One of them was, people didn't think they had a problem. And they justified it by saying, we're just big-boned family. Another thing was, parents had lost control. So if you've got children, when you're in a supermarket or a grocery store, and your children are pestering you, what do? You give in. You give them something to eat or something to drink. I mean, I've done this. The other thing that was happening is there was an increased risk and fear of children playing alone outside. So you stopped your children from playing outside and you brought them inside the house. And then you used food and snacks as bribes to get children to do what you wanted them to do. So parents were giving in to their kids. And the television and all the public service advertising was saying, you're bad. Can you imagine? Behavior is not going to change. So the insight that we were able to extract from all of that work was, you're not a bad parent, but every decision you're making is killing your children with your kindness. And that was the basis of the campaign that the UK then ran called Change for Life. But it was based on a rich understanding and what had been happening for many years before that had been judgment. So our learning is, how do you move from judgment to understanding? And we can do that in the climate change debate when we're talking to people where we go, I don't understand why they don't get it. Yeah? Understand why they don't get it. So we've spoken there briefly about the individual. We've spoken about parents and their children. But we have to think about them as well as the system within which they live and work and how that system affects them. And a really, really classic marketing tool is to think about a change journey. It's not a change moment, it's not a change initiative, it's a change journey. And in this case, the change journey started not with the parents and the children, it started, or it had to start, with mobilizing the network. And the network would have included schools and doctors and libraries. It's anybody who was going to influence, including the media, including retailers, including manufacturers. So they started or restarted this by saying, how do you mobilize the network? Then they had to reframe the issue. And the issue, looking at that insight, was, you're not bad parents. What you're doing is unhealthy for your children. And every parent wants to do stuff that's good and healthy for their children. And that subtle reframe goes from finger pointing to understanding, and it was part of the reframing. And then personalizing it, they used many surveys to try and understand, to get people to kind of think about their situation. They inspired the change with many examples. One of the best examples was when you're in a supermarket and your children are pestering you, you don't have to say no. You can say yes, but your yes could be to something healthy. They call it swaps. So you don't say no, you find it a way to actually swap what you're giving them. But we had to work with manufacturers to make sure there were healthy alternatives being manufactured. So that's the example of the journey that the parents and kids were going on. But it also had to be talking to manufacturers, to the PepsiCos and the Unilevers of this world about what products they were producing. It had to be working with doctors and nurses and hospitals so that when you're taking your child into the doctor for a cold, it doesn't help if they're busy drinking Coke and eating snacks, because basically it says the healthcare environment endorses that kind of behavior. And policymakers and retailers. So it was the whole system that had to be brought together to enable that change based on that big insight.
Okay, fifth lesson, make it central to commercial strategy. So all too often we find that there's a little team that does the environment and social responsibility stuff, and they sit in a separate office, usually along some corridor, and they are not central to what the business does every day. And if it's not central to what everyone in the business is doing, guess what? The impact isn't very great. So here's an example of doing it differently that we did a few years ago with Ben & Jerry's. So I'm just going to talk you through, for those of you that are not marketers in the room, what a 3-year commercial strategy looks like in like 1 second, which is what you do is you say, this is where we are now. You agree where you'd like to get to, and usually that's about growth, and it's measured in pounds and dollars, and then you come up with 3, 4, 5 things that you're going to do to get there. It's sort of that easy and that hard. But here's the thing that you can do differently. Rather than making it all measured in pounds and dollars, you can measure it also in social and environmental impact. And if you put that at the heart of how each step is measured, then suddenly it becomes the heart of everybody's day job, not just those people at the end of the corridor who've got it, the title. And that's a really, really powerful thing to do. Now, I would like to say I've got lots of examples of this. The truth is I don't yet. But we have got to make that happen, because that's when we'll really engage the power of big corporations. So that's our fifth one.
Okay, so this one's based on a bit of a paradox. And the paradox is that good people with really strong values, potentially committed to lots of brilliant initiatives and personal missions in their lives outside the company, when they come inside the company and need to make decisions, potentially they make decisions that aren't necessarily positive or good decisions. And that paradox is confusing. Why would someone with really strong values, really strong commitments, when they come into the construct of an organization, do things that feel counter to who they are? So that paradox we have called reinvent the framework, because businesses are basically a set of constructs, rules, approaches and ways, and that is how the business makes decisions ultimately. Without that, it'd be like, well, an example would be the UK driving on the left and suddenly saying, hey, look, let's just drive on the right, and nothing else changed around it, but there would be car crashes and mayhem everywhere. And I guess that's the issue here, that if we try and inspire a change without readdressing the frameworks that sets of decisions are made within, we're going to cause mayhem, and quite quickly we're going to run out of steam. So most businesses have a framework that might look something like this, or multiple frameworks that ask questions like this. So, who, why, what, how type of sort of approach, whereby each of those decisions slowly influences how the business is going to make money. Ultimately, it's about driving the share and the bottom line. Fantastic. But if we're going to change this, we need to get people to take a new consciousness at each of those decision points. And that's quite hard. So specifically, we need to get people to look both upstream of the impacts and downstream of the impacts of each of those decisions, a more forensic analysis. Upstream, it's the obvious things like manufacturing, supply, packaging, impacts on communities that are potentially helping produce the raw ingredients, etc. Downstream, packaging, circularity, etc., etc. They're quite a complex array of very different things. Profit's quite easy to focus on, isn't it? But we need people to now think about those things to get to a joined up people, planet and profit outcome and improvement in each of those. Now in itself, that just sounds like an academic exercise of rewriting questions, and that's jolly nice, isn't it? But the reality is that nothing will change unless we surround that with an ecosystem of a new culture, number one, Number two, new skills. So people need to have quite different skills than they've had so far in these organisations to address those questions properly. Then lastly, a new ability to make decisions off different parameters, different metrics. So that's work we're engaged with about 2 or 3 companies at the moment, and it's slow, but it is effective because it gets right to the heart of the organisation, right to the kind of, almost the DNA of the business. So if we can change that, we can change things pretty fundamentally.
Okay, the 7th of the 7 lessons. So simple places to start. Now, by the very fact you're here, I know that you'll all know what a carbon footprint is or a scope 1, 2, 3 emission. You might be surprised, maybe you're not surprised, by how many senior people in big organisations actually don't know that. And worse than the fact that they don't know those things is the fact that they're now too embarrassed to ask, okay? Because it's like a bit embarrassing that you don't know what those things are that everyone's talking about. So earlier this year, we partnered with the WFA, which is the World Federation of Advertisers, and we created a free-to-access resource that basically, in 10 steps, took people through what they needed to do in terms of climate change. And in a second, I'm going to show you how, if you're interested, you can get access to this, although you will have to pretend to be a marketer, okay? But we've got the permission of the WFA that you can do this. So the 10 steps are 5 in what can you do, which starts with really simple things like measuring your carbon footprint, reducing your emissions, encouraging behavior change, which is a lot of what we've talked about today, thinking about circularity, although for this audience that will probably be a bit too far, but we wanted to introduce the concept and tell them where they could go to learn more. Linking it to growing your business, because if you can't link it to growing your business, we're back into that, it's with a team down a corridor that aren't central to what you do. And then how you do it. So how do you communicate what you're doing in a way that's genuine and transparent? How do you partner with people? Because partnership's so important. How do you measure it? Et cetera, et cetera. So it's sort of obvious, but for many people it's not obvious, and we hope it's helpful. So if you're interested, that is the code. And Adam is going to tell you what you have to say, because it will ask you a bunch of questions, including the fact asking you, what does it ask you, Adam?
Well, it asks you which company you work for starters. So there is actually an other option. So we're advocating lying at this point. So just click in other. It'll ask you how many years in marketing you've worked. And again, just make it up. So as Carol said, for all those questions, there is either an other option or there are the opportunity just to pretend, okay? And as Carol said, the WFA are perfectly fine with this and are glad for the resource to go out more widely. I think the questions, the approach is quite simple and it's quite useful potentially in many other contexts too. So if you're trying to create change in groups that aren't yet necessarily buying into it or finding an easy way to make the journey.
Yeah, and please, if you can't access it now, come and see us afterwards and we'll make sure that you can, if you think of people that might be able to use it.
Okay, so those were our 7 lessons. Just in our experience, what we have learned that we felt was things that gave us hope and positivity, that we felt was causing impact and change, that was helping us shift the needle. Each one has merit in its own right, we believe. But we're interested to see what you think now. So again, same brief as before, have a quick conversation with those around you. Is this resonating? What have your experiences been? Have you found any success with any of this stuff? Is there anything else?
Hi. My name is Marina.
Hi,
Very
Marina.
nice presentation. I was wondering for you, because you showed all these products like fast food, so you may have to work with these sorts of companies, I would imagine. So I was wondering for you how it is, because you could actually, the nutritional value of a lot of the things we have in the supermarket is really not much. So we have a lot of products in the supermarket which don't have any nutritional value and they are still there. And they are more important maybe than the actual. So maybe how you can incentivize those companies, say maybe, look, we don't consume this, or I don't know, because I'm sure a lot of the products that you work for, you don't probably consume. I would imagine you are well informed. Sorry, I don't know, but I am saying this from myself. For example, the Ben & Jerry's, or I love ice cream. But the Ben & Jerry's have so much sugar in it. If it didn't have so much sugar, maybe I eat it. And there is this thing in the UK about putting so much sugar to everything. And obesity is going up. So it's not the consumers, it's not the parents, when you were talking about the parents' guilt. It's the companies that are putting all. So we are not going to be able to do much, I think, because I have that syndrome, the second one. The COB? The COB syndrome, that you feel very small, you cannot do anything.
The COGS, yeah.
So, yes. So, I mean, if I was talking here with my neighbor, sorry to disturb you, Lucas. Lucas, you study?
I'm a climate scientist.
So I asked him, what do you think? And
Sorry?
what do you say when I ask, what do you think? But you said something like, well, we just need to get rid of the carbon emissions. Very simple, right? So a lot of and that's it. Basically, a lot of the things you went through, you could cut. Because you are going through a lot of work yourselves, but a lot of the things that you talked about, I think you can actually say, okay, this is not necessary. Just tell the companies, I really want to do this campaign for you, but why don't you think about getting rid of so much sugar or making, I don't know, because I'm sure you know, you're very well-informed people. I don't know.
I think it's a really great question. I think it's a question of values. So I personally believe a world without Ben & Jerry's ice cream would be a poorer place. Now, I totally accept that there will be people in the audience who don't agree with me. Does that mean that you should be eating Ben & Jerry's ice cream every day? No. Or whole tubs of it? No. But I actually think it would be a poorer place. And I think it would be hypocritical of me, who has access to things like Ben & Jerry's ice cream, to say that that's something that actually I don't think anybody else should have access to. But I absolutely do believe that with the whole question of climate change comes questions of justice. But I also do think that we're adults, and in the right environment, we can all make sensible choices. But it's a question of values, yeah?
So this is part of our challenge. How do we get organisations to listen to us to shift the bias of products they have in their portfolios towards things that are not problematic in that space? Now, we have a lot of conversations internally about that. So there are some companies we will not work for. We refuse to work for it because we cannot square their intent and their plans and their future with the aims that we have. So we say no. And that's always a big debate and discussion in our company to make sure we're making that decision really clearly. The second thing, though, is if we go in and just say, stop doing that, we won't get listened to. So we have to keep finding ways to either help people be more informed, or, as the Ben & Jerry's example was, to integrate both people and planet alongside the commerciality into their strategic planning. So they come to the conclusion themselves that this is no longer possible to integrate in our portfolio in line with our net zero targets, for example. So carbon labelling, for example, is a great example where people should be able to start making more informed choices for a certain part of the population. But there's a whole host of other things we need to do besides. And we're working to ensure all those things are included in the products and work of our partner clients. So is there an easy silver bullet to this? No. I mean, do we want to stand up and say what's right? Absolutely. And we're prepared to do that.
I wouldn't work for companies I wouldn't make any advertising campaign for products that are not giving nutritional value to the population, for example.
So I mean, a big part of the work for Change for Life was in that exact space. So we completely agree with you. This is fundamentally important.
But
I agree, and I think that's the journey we're on in terms of how we're challenging companies about that. And it remains a challenge. So I think it's something we've picked up, particularly since we became a B Corp. And the B Corp forces you to look at multiple different stakeholders. And it changed the way we think about growth, because you get good growth and you get bad growth. So I think it's a really good point, and I'm glad you shared that. I see there are one or two other hands that have gone up, somewhere at the back and then somewhere in the front. If we could do those, Alex, thank you.
Hi, it's a really interesting conversation. I think just on that point, you need the outrage and then you also need the optimism, right? So my name's David, I'm marketing director at Winnow, also a B Corp. We develop AI tools to help chefs reduce food waste, and I have a case study here for you. So we helped IKEA successfully halve their food waste globally in over 400 stores in 33 countries versus a 2017 baseline.
Wow.
And so we followed lots of this, and just two additions that I think I kind of add. One is we found it really important that we needed to empower the people in the kitchens, so IKEA called these co-workers, there were 20,000 co-workers working with our tools. We had to give them the autonomy to make decisions based on the data that we were giving them, otherwise it was useless. And then the second thing that we had to do, and that IKEA did actually themselves in a really kind of positive and forward-thinking way, as you'd expect, is that they created this culture of learning and kind of sharing of best practices. And they had these kind of groups, you know, from different countries and different kind of roles would get together and run webinars. People would share kind of best practices and tips about how they'd been using our tool. It was awesome to see. So there were thousands and thousands of people using this tool, and they followed lots of kind of exactly what you're putting up here. So more, please.
Thank you. That's a wonderful example.
It's also a good example, I think, of the B Corp movement as well, because the other thing in B Corp is not just the amplification of voices, but the sharing of learnings as well. So what you've delivered in IKEA is also true of the movement itself. So connecting with people like yourselves and ensuring we're taking the right kind of push and challenge to the organisations we work with, because you've inspired something in us. So we're very open to all of that, so thank you.
And can we add 8 and 9 afterwards?
Hello, my name's Chloe and I'm a delegate with Northwestern University. I am a master's student. I have a twofold question. The first is, obviously the ideal would be to have some regulations that sort of start to change the mechanisms of the economic game, incentivizing good carbon emissions reductions actions and also penalizing through fines, etc. But as we're waiting for that, these types of actions are critical. So my first is, what are the types of persuasive arguments you're making to these companies? And if it's too hard to generalize, maybe an example of how adding climate and social impact to their overall strategy doesn't hurt but help the bottom line. And second, I was on a project for a carbon accounting software startup, and I was really shocked at the lack of an ability to actually track Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions, and particularly Scope 3 emissions, as they often are the greatest contributor to a company's supply chain emissions. Is there anything interesting happening in that space that's enabling companies to be able to track that better?
So why don't I take the first one? I think there were 3 questions there, so I'm hoping you two can remember the second 2. So on the first question, I actually think the answer was best expressed by one of the presenters yesterday, the 2 ladies that were talking about coaching, where they talked about how important it is for you to find your own personal connection with climate change. And that the wonderful thing is that because climate change impacts absolutely everything, any good that you're doing in your life can be connected, or anything that worries you in your life can always be connected to climate change. So finding that personal connection, and usually I think that is the most powerful way to motivate people. But I would also say, please don't waste your energy trying to change people's minds. I would personally much prefer that we all spent our energy working with coalitions of the willing, because then people will follow. So that would be my answer to your first question.
And can I just add to that, actually, which is, I think I'd refer you back to the understanding versus judgment piece as well, because the argument will be really nuanced and varied for different people. So, you know, we need the chief executive to change their minds, you know, to get this. That argument there is going to be different to the, you know, middle manager who sits in the organisation, and it may be for the chief exec. You know, you're not going to be able to recruit people into the future, or your business will be deselected within a few years if you're not able to stand up to these tests. So I think it's really taking the time to make sure you have put yourself into their shoes, understood them properly, and suspended judgment to get to that point. Your arguments be far more compelling in that instance.
I would add one thing. For so many years, the boards at big companies have been told what they must be doing. And it's a little bit like Change for Life. You must not give your kids. You know that story? But when you can frame this back to CEOs, that this is the single biggest opportunity rather than the single biggest threat, they're more likely to be listening to you. So it may not be lots of data, and Carol, when she talks about trying to understand where they're at, that's useful. But there's a reframe required here, and telling them that they must be doing something because it's an issue is not as motivating to the psyche of a business person when you tell them about it could be the single biggest opportunity for them. And I think that's when the switch changes, and then you talk about how they could turn it into an opportunity for themselves. Sorry to interrupt.
No, on your measurement question, and you've asked some really, really good questions here. So it's a question we're asking as well, because it is the ultimate, isn't it? If you can't measure this stuff, how do you really show progress against it that's real? So we are looking around to try and understand what is the landscape of measurement. We're seeing some interesting stuff, there's some AI technology that's helping, etc. But is there a sort of a universally sort of audited silver bullet that's nailing this? We've not come across it. So we're really open to understand from you guys if anyone's come across anything like this where, this is the authority. I mean, I think that we're relying on the kind of like the New Climate Initiative groups, etc., to do that kind of forensic auditing and help us get some perspective on it. Is there a dashboard that gives you absolute clarity? No, but not in our experience, but love to hear.
And it's, if we don't have it, it's definitely a big business opportunity because businesses find this really hard to do, complex, costly. It's done by a few experts. And wouldn't it be wonderful if it was more open access and democratic?
So I think we've got time for one more question. I think you had your hand up. We take that, and then I think we're going to need to wrap.
First of all, let me congratulate you for such an inspiring presentation. For me, the first lesson is brave and public leadership. I think it's illogical to start with a brave and public leadership. As Albert Einstein mentioned before, that we cannot solve a problem with the same mentality or mind that created it. So I think that we have to make sure that the general atmosphere could allow kids and young people to understand that we have a dilemma between profit and planet. So I think that we have to start, to get started with creating a general atmosphere, allowing kids, allowing young people to understand. Yesterday, I knew that Spain started with a process of integrating climate change lessons in higher education institutions. So I think that we have to dig deeper and to bring kids to such approach.
100% agree. And by the way, these aren't in an order. We probably should have said this actually. They are all a potential start point. We're really clear as well, though, to your point, that the true power comes in combining all of these. But you're absolutely right. It has to be inspired bottom up, top down, yes, and through the middle. It's a complete ecosystem of change, ultimately. And I think you're right. That groundswell is going to be where so much of the power comes from.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I think the journey we've been on personally, but I also think it's in preparing for the conversation we wanted to have with you today, we've asked ourselves the question, do we believe it is positive to have climate positive growth? And we do. And I think it's because we believe that businesses and big corporations actually have a unique ability to change the way their consumers and the people that they serve behave, and it could be done for the good, that we believe this is positive and it's possible. I'm not sure we would have said that 2 or 3 years ago. I think the more we've learned and the more we've understood and the more we've seen some of those positive signs happening and our belief that all these kind of different enablers together can make change, we fundamentally believe this is possible. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily right for all types of products and categories. So Carol's example about toothpaste, yeah, we should be encouraging people to brush more, clean their teeth, have oral hygiene, because that affects health, which affects the ability to work, believe it or not. So encouraging the behavior and good behavior like that with those categories, no question. We're not sure the world needs any more SUVs, right? So there'll be some categories where we've got question marks, and as Adam said, we've also said no to a number of companies and products where we don't believe it is right. But the groundswell we can create amongst the other big corporations where we believe the change can be for the good, absolutely we believe climate positive growth is feasible. So if you're interested in any more understanding about the nuances of behavior change, there is a link here on this QR code. It'll take you to a very short, I think it's 6 pages, which talks about some techniques, which gives some examples, and it actually shares a bit more about Change for Life in terms of what they did. So if you're interested, this is a really good resource if you want to download that. And also, as I said, we're on a journey, not just us at Oxford, but all of us. If you want to continue this conversation, please get in touch. This for us is really just one engagement level, but we'd love to carry on the conversation with you. So our email addresses are there, and the QR code takes you through to our site. So thank you for your time and for the questions. And goodness, we hope we can make a difference on this big global issue. Thank you.